Right. So here we are. We talked about Queueable Apex. Okay, so Queueable Apex basically an Apex code which can be put in the job queue and it will get executed whenever the resources become available. Right. So usually required for long running operations which you feel that should not actually go and affect the main logics, main Apex logics like the synchronous ones. Right. So three things which I told you about Queueable Apex. One, you'll have to implement Queueable interface. Second, you should create a method called execute where you should write what you actually want to execute, and it should be a void method. And third is you use system.enqueueJob method. So this is a predefined method which we use for putting an Apex class into the job queue. Fine. So today we are going to do this and see how it works. Right. So first of all, we have to create the class. So where do you go and create the class? Setup, develop, Apex classes. Just the way you create a normal class, you start creating a class here. Public class, Q class. Alright. Implements Queueable. This needs to be written. And then write the method public void execute and then whatever code you want to actually execute inside this class. So let's say right. Let's say this is the Apex that I want to execute. Right. So my Queueable class is ready. So this implementing this interface means that you can use it. You can put this code in the queue. You can put this class in the queue. Right. So that's it. All that you have to do is just go ahead and save it. Save the code. Now, how do you uh, put this class in the job queue? Okay. So all that we need to do is whenever we want to execute this code, we have to just put it in the Apex job queue. How will we do that? For doing that, we need to use this method system.enqueueJob. Okay. So the system.enqueueJob method requires a class. Which class to put in the job queue? So you just say new name of your class, whatever your class name is. Okay. This method, as you would remember, we talked yesterday that this method actually returns an ID, Apex job ID, which you can actually use for monitoring the process, right? So you should write it like this: ID, job ID equals this. That's it. So to put that class in the job queue, all that you have to do is you just have to execute this line of code, and you can execute it wherever you want. So we will execute it from anonymous window. Anonymous code block is what we have seen. So usually your queueable class will be executed from anonymous window, because whenever you want to actually execute it, you can just go ahead and write this line in anonymous window, right? So you don't actually have to go ahead create another method and all that for that. So this is something which you will require once in a while. So you can just go ahead and write this line in the anonymous window. So let's go to the anonymous code window. All right. The class is fine. So just go ahead and execute it. Okay. The moment you execute it, it will put this class in the Apex job queue. Click on execute. Now, this has been put in the job queue, Apex job queue. How do you check what is the status of that job? To check the status of the job, and under setup on the left hand side you have monitor. You see monitor option. Just go to monitor, click on jobs and say Apex jobs. So right at the bottom of the menu you have monitor Apex jobs. Click on this. See, was submitted, what type of job, queueable job, what is the current status, got completed. Because there's a developer org no one is using, and the operation that we defined was also very small. So it already got completed. Resources were available, it got executed. Let me see if my account got created. If that code got executed, you should have that account. What is the name of the account? Okay. Yeah. So the account got created here. See this? So your code got executed. Correct? So this is how you actually define a queuable class, right? So your queuable class will have only one method, and that has to be a execute method. Name of the method has to be execute, and whatever code you want to execute, you can actually put inside that. Right. Now, we were talking about chaining of jobs in our last session, right? So what is chaining of jobs? Right now you have just one class, okay, which you need to execute. Just think of a situation, you have two classes. Let's say this is what you have, and then you have one more, which is Queueable class 2. Okay. Now if you have Queueable class 1 and Queueable class 2, and you want to make sure that the second class executes only after the first one has got executed, there are two options that you have. One, you can put both of them parallelly into the job queue, which means you can use these kind of statements twice. Okay, one, two. Okay, if you put both these statements parallelly, the problem will be that when the resources become available, they will get executed. So if resources become available to execute the second one will get executed first. Correct. And if the resources become available to execute the first one, that will get executed. But in some scenarios, you might have the requirement that you want to perform second action only when the first action has occurred. In that case, what you can do is, instead of putting both these lines in the anonymous window, put the second line in the inside the first job. That's the point. So this way is what is happening. You just have to call the first one, the queue class. This queue class gets executed, and when this is done, it calls the second class. So that executes the second class. So you're in this way, this is called chaining of jobs. So you're actually chaining one job with the other job. This way you are ensuring that the second jobs get initiated only when the first one is complete. Alright, let me know if anyone has a doubt or question. Cable class.
What's the parameter we are passing here? It's common for execute method.
For queuable interface, this is going to be the parameter. Queuable context. This has to be defined. For queuable interface, any class which has a queuable interface, execute method should have this.
Okay, right now it's executed immediately because there is no
Resources are
other
available.
job in the queue.
Right. So the logic is pretty simple. It will get in the queue, and if it whenever it finds resources available, it will get executed. Now, this is a developer, or the operation which we are trying to do is a small one. It found the resources, it executed immediately. Right.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Now we have understood the concept of queuable. So queuable is when you have a long running operation, and you just want to put it in the queue. Fine. The second is a schedulable apex. Queuable concept is fine. We can actually put it in the queue. But sometimes the requirement becomes a little more complex. That the code should automatically go into the job queue at a certain time. Let's say every Friday. So sometimes you will have an apex code that you want to execute on a frequent basis. Okay, and you don't actually want someone to do manually. I do not know if you guys have done a reporting dashboard, and you might have seen scheduling reports. The report automatically gets generated and it gets sent to the people. Same way, in case I have an Apex code which I want to run on a frequent basis, let's say every week, then instead of someone manually going and putting it in the job queue every week, you also have the option of defining uh, a schedule for the Apex code. Okay, we call that schedulable Apex. Like this is queuable Apex, we call it schedulable Apex. And these things are so simple, actually, just going by the word itself. I mean, Salesforce has kept the names also so familiar to our daily use things, that you will not have any confusion. I mean, with the name itself, schedulable Apex, you understand that okay, when this is an Apex code which can be scheduled, that's it, right? So schedulable Apex is written and executed more or less similar to the way this Queueable Apex is written. Okay. Only difference is schedulable Apex will implement schedulable interface. Schedulable interface. Okay. And you don't have to actually write a method in anonymous window to call it. You define a schedule for execution. Okay. You have to define a schedule for execution. So this is the only difference. Rest everything between schedulable Apex and queuable Apex is same. So how do you write schedulable Apex? Public class, name whatever you want to name the class, implements schedule. That's it. Rest everything remains same. This also has a method called execute, which is a void method. Public void execute. Here the parameter is going to be schedulable context. And here code should come here. That's it. Okay, so the only difference between writing schedulable and queuable is, instead of the word queuable, you are using the word schedulable. Now the moment you implement schedulable interface, this class becomes schedulable, which means you can schedule the class. You can define a frequency for executing this class, but this still continues to be a asynchronous Apex, which means if you have defined the schedule to be, let's say, Friday 7 p.m. Okay, so this code is not going to get executed sharp at Friday 7 p.m. It will be put in the job queue on Friday 7 p.m. and then again the same concept. It will wait for the resources to become available, and whenever, so if the resources are available right at 7 p.m., it will get executed right there at that point of time. Otherwise it might get a little delayed. Okay, so this is also asynchronous. All that we have to do is go to Apex classes, click on new, public class, name of the class anything, implements schedulable, public void execute, okay, your code is ready, schedulable class is ready. All right, Now, how are you gonna um, execute this? How are you gonna put it in the job queue? What is the best way of putting it in the job queue? Anyone? We really don't have to put it in the job queue. The good thing is you don't have to do that. Why? Because that's something which will automatically happen. All that you have to do is you just have to define a schedule for it. Correct? Like in Queueable Apex, you had to put it in the job queue, and for that you had to write that extra line of code system.enqueueJob. In schedulable class, you don't have the concept of putting it in the job queue. You don't have to do that. You just have to define the frequency. Salesforce will automatically put it in the job queue. So where do you go and define the frequency? Just go to setup Apex classes. Once your class is ready, saved, go to save, Apex classes, the list of Apex classes. Here you will find an option called Schedule Apex. Click on this, click on the Schedule Apex. See, you have the option of defining the frequency. Okay. If you read this line, schedule an Apex class that implements schedulable interface. So only the classes which implement schedulable interface can be scheduled. So, quite obvious. That's the reason why we have defined that interface there. Job name can be anything as choose the Apex class that you want to use. I want to use S class. Okay. What is your frequency? Weekly or monthly? It's weekly. I say okay. Execute it every Tuesday, starting from this date. Pretty simple. From which date till which date you want this to get executed, and what is your preferred time? What time you want this to get started? Okay. If you read it here, exact start time will depend on job queue activity. So as I said, whatever time you're defining here, 2 p.m. is when it will get into the job queue. 2 p.m. is not the time when it will start executing. That it depends, what all other activities are there, correct, in the queue. And now, if you see this, uh, you also will realize that there can be multiple jobs, Apex jobs in the job queue also, right? Like one queuable Apex is there, there can be one schedulable Apex, there can be one batch Apex. So sometimes there are multiple jobs in the job queue also. Okay, so it's not the main logic which is only actually restricting the execution of these codes. Some asynchronous also, some asynchronous code can also make the other asynchronous code wait. Correct. Let's say, when it gets executed at 2 p.m., you have one more scheduled Apex which got executed at 1 p.m. Okay. So now this code will have to wait at least for that one because that got into the job queue first. So that will get completed and then this one will actually get executed. Save it. Okay. So I have just defined the schedule. This time we have not executed anything. Only the schedule is defined. Now, where do you go and check whether the schedule got defined properly or not? Again, go to the same setup monitor. Under jobs, you have one scheduled jobs option because this is a scheduled job. So just go and check. See, along with two scheduled reports, I think these two are scheduled reports, and this is S1, which is a scheduled Apex class. And next scheduled run is on 26th of January, 2 p.m. Okay, so you can anytime come here and see, okay, which all classes are already scheduled and what is the status and when are they due. You can also check it in the Apex job queue. See, this job has got queued in the Apex job queue already to be executed on 26th. Fine, queued. This is a job ID for this. Got it? So status of this is being shown as queued. It is already in the queue, but it has not got into the Apex queue as such. It's not waiting for execution till 26 January. Till that time, it will not get executed. After that, it actually starts getting into the main queue for execution. Clear? Let me know if there is any difficulty understanding this. Schedulable is even simpler as compared to queuable because you already understand the queuable concept. So you just have to see if you have a code which needs to be executed on a frequent basis, choose schedulable. If you have something which needs to be executed, once in a while, and there is no defined frequency for it, queuable it is. Fine. If you have to run a code which just has to execute before a record is created, then how are you going to define that code? I have a logic which needs to get executed before a record is created. What is the best way of doing that? I have an Apex code which I want to execute before a new record is created. What is the best way of doing that?
Triggers
Trigger. Which trigger? Which event?
before, uh,
Before insert. I have an
yeah,
I have an Apex code which needs to be executed on click of a button. What is the best way of doing that? When someone clicks on a button, then the Apex code should get executed. What is the best way of doing that? The user will see the user interface, click on a button, and then the Apex code should get executed. What's the best way of doing that? Click of a button. How do you do that? No, there's an Apex code. I want to execute it on the click of a button. What is the best way of doing that? How will you call that Apex code?
command button
So basically
to
through
write the
Visual
Apex
Force
code on
controller,
Visual Force. Yeah, Apex dot
because
command
we are
button.
talking about the UI, then if you need Visual Force, on Visual Force you will have the button and you'll have to write the code and all that stuff. You have an Apex code that is a long running code and it needs to be executed, you know, whenever you want, once in a while, let's say once in 2 months. What is the best way of doing that? Where do you write that Apex code? The long running Apex code which needs to be executed once in 2 months. Where is the best place to write that?
Schedulable. Yeah, schedulable.
Queueable. You have an Apex code
No,
which needs.
schedulable.
Sorry?
Schedulable.
Once in a month we can schedule, so it's
Okay, I
schedulable.
mean, what I'm saying is, let's say your frequency is not defined, then queueable. If you have a defined frequency, schedulable. So it's pretty simple. Okay, don't try to understand these concepts and then think of requirements. Okay, the best is understand the requirement and then go to the concept. So whenever you are talking to a client, basically the client is not going to tell you that go ahead and create a schedulable class, or even your manager or whoever, supervisor. Point is, you will have the requirement and you will have to map which concept best suits your requirement. So if my end user wants to execute the Apex code on click of a button, Visual Force Controller makes sense. If he wants to execute the code on an insert or delete operation, then trigger makes sense. If he says that I want the code to get executed every week, then schedulable Apex makes sense. Got it? So we just have to understand what we just, and this is pretty simple. And if you see, you by now you must be able to understand what exactly is needed and when what is needed, right? So that shouldn't be a problem. Now, the next concept that we have is,
Ajit,
yeah,
one question.
yes, please go ahead.
On the Queueable Apex,
Hmm.
what are the ways of calling it excluding that anonymous block? How can we call that?
You can call it from wherever you want. All that you have to do is you have to call this line of code, okay, and you can put it in any method, correct? So anonymous code block is what? You're just calling the code in anonymous code block also, correct? The same way you can actually go ahead and put this code anywhere you want. You can actually associate with it a button. You can call it from a trigger. Inside the trigger, you go and write this line will get called. You go and write it inside a button, this thing will be called. But usually, uh, you would not want to associate it with a trigger because you don't want this to get into the job queue every time a trigger is called. But it can be called anywhere. You can write an Apex code. You can go and write this line. Correct? Okay. Now comes batch effects. Okay. Batch effects also, the name sounds a little fancy, but it's a very simple concept which you can easily relate to. Just think of a concept. Um, okay, let me give you a scenario first. Understand this. Let's say we have two bookshelves. I have one here and I have one here. Okay, I have 500 books here in this shelf, and there is no book here. This is a new shelf. We've taken this new. Okay, I ask you to transfer the books from this shelf to this shelf. Okay, and I have given you a container in which you can carry, let's say, 10 books. So I give you a container which can, which can handle or hold 10 books, and I give you this bookshelf. I ask you to move all the books from shelf 1 to shelf 2. What are you going to do now? How will you transfer 500 books? You just have a container with which can hold 10 books.
3 times we have to go and
So
pick
you are basically
the
talking about making batches, correct? So what you are going to do, you will put 10 books, transfer it, then come back, again put 10 books, transfer it, right? That's what you have to do because my container does not allow me to hold more than 10 books, but I have to move all 500. So what is the best way of doing that? Break it into batches. So what you are actually doing here, you are breaking it into 50 batches. So one first batch will have 10, second batch will have 10, third batch will have 10. That's it. That is called batch processing. Okay. So if you have a big task which is not permitted at once, then you usually do that. Correct. You're trying to transfer 50 GB data from one laptop to other laptop. You have a let's say 8 GB pen drive. What do? You just have to fill in 8 GB, transfer it, come back again. Take the second 8 GB shifted, right? So we break it into batches. The same concept is applicable in Salesforce also. So we have limitation for everything. As we talked earlier, Salesforce has limitation for everything. Okay. So usually, if you are trying to work with a huge amount of data, okay, more than 10,000 records, which need to be processed. When I say processed, it can be updation or something. Or okay, so if you are trying to deal with more than 10,000 records, you need to uh, perform this operation in batches, because Salesforce can handle 10,000 records in one DML operation. So that's the capacity. So if you know that the set of records which you are going to process is more than 10,000, then you need to do the batch processing for it. Got it? Good thing is that here you actually don't have to go ahead and create the batches. Salesforce will automatically create the batches provided you implement the batchable context. Simple. So the moment you implement the batchable context, Salesforce can actually go ahead and break the batches for you. Otherwise, if you are trying to process 50,000 records and you don't use the batchable context, then Salesforce will reach its limit at 10,000, right? And it will throw you an error that no, I cannot perform 50,000. So that's the thing, right? Like if you put 500 books in the container which can only hold 10 books, what will happen? The container will, you won't be able to transfer those books. Okay, it will break or something. The same thing happens here. So if you try to process more than 10,000 records in one DML operation, that does not work. Okay, that doesn't work. So for that reason, Salesforce allows you to do batch processing. Okay. So what do we need to do in batch Apex? Let's understand this. So batch Apex is again very similar to your schedulable and queuable class, but there are a few differences. Difference number one is that in batch Apex you implement batchable context, batchable interface. Sorry, you implement batchable interface. Second is basically database.batchable. Database.batchable is the name of the interface which you need to implement. Secondly, here you have three methods as compared to the one method of schedulable and queuable. In batch Apex, you have three methods. Okay. One is a start method, second is an execute. So execute method is there. Third is finish. Okay. Start method is used for querying the data. Breaking it into batches. So your start method will be used for querying the data and breaking the data into the batches. Execute method will be used for execution. Finish is anything you want to do at end of all batches. Got it? So this will have three methods. For one method, so again, before I try and explain this, let's go back to the same bookshelf example. Okay. So let's say I tell you that okay, move these 500 books from shelf 1 to shelf 2, right? And I gave you this container. What is the first thing that you will do? First of all, you will have to make those batches, right? Perform, divide that. Okay, fine. This is the first shipment. This is the second shipment. This is the third shipment. That's something which you have to do. Then execution is simple. You just carry it from the first place to the second place. Okay. So that execution will actually, execution process will happen 50 times, right? Because you have 50 batches in that case. And if I tell you that once you have moved all the books, okay, please go ahead and sell the shelf one, or please send an email to your manager that I have moved all the books, right? So that is the finish action. That once all the batches have got processed, there's something that you want to do. Okay, the same thing happens here. Start method allows you to query the data which needs to be processed and break that data into the queries. Execute method is the actual execution where you perform whatever you are supposed to perform, whatever updates or whatever needs to be done. But this execute method will run multiple times, okay, once for each batch. So depending on how many number of batches you have, and then finally when all the execution is done, all the records have got processed, then comes your finish. In finish, you can define any code that you want to execute post all the batches have got concluded. Right? Let's say you want to send an email to someone that okay fine, all the batches have successfully completed, or you want to call some other batch, or you want to call some other code. So which you wanted to do only when all the batches process successfully, you can put that code in finish method. Clear? So that is how we actually define our batch Apex. So there will be three methods: start method, execute method, finish method. Execute and finish are void methods. They will not have any return type. Start method will have a return type. It has to have, because that's what it is doing, right? It's forming the batches and it will pass it on to the execute, right? So it has to have a return type. So this is a non-void and these two are void methods. This is non-void and these two, execute and finish, are void methods. Okay. The third is, how do you put your batch apex into the job queue? Okay. How do you execute, or how do you call a batch apex? It's pretty similar to the way you put the queuable apex. Here we have a method called database dot execute batch. Okay, so this is the method that we're going to use. In Queueable Apex, we used system.enqueueJob. Here it is database.executeBatch. And after that, whatever name of your class, batch class, whatever name. Right. So this is what we are going to use to put a batch apex or a batch class into the job queue. Right. So batch apex is important only if you're dealing with a huge chunk of records, and that I'm actually going to process a big set of records. Let's say you're trying to update all your database, right? And that you have a database of more than 10,000 records. Then you should use batch apex. Till the time you are dealing with 500, 1000, 2000, 3000 records, you are absolutely fine to use queueable, schedulable, all those things. That's absolutely fine. Right? Okay. So we will start writing the batch apex, and we will actually execute the batch apex in tomorrow's session, because it's going to take a little time for us and we are not left with enough time to write the code and execute it today.